I am a 19-year-old girl and I work as a waitress in a small local restaurant in the city where I am currently studying at university. The job is supposed to help me develop some work ethic and, more importantly, earn money while I am away from home. Anyone who has worked in the service industry knows how it can be working hours much longer than contracted, spontaneous shifts, terrible customers, and even worse managers. It wasn't always bad, but it definitely wasn't often good. I hated the job itself, but without it, I could barely afford to eat, let alone go out and socialize. The people I worked with made it bearable. Worries became my social life. I missed home a lot. I grew up in a beautiful home with a wonderful family. My mother and father were so perfect they seemed like catalog parents. Both worked in the medical field. My father was a doctor and my mother a surgeon. They were both fit, healthy, and loving. My little sister was 16 and looked different from me. She had olive skin and darker hair that flowed down her back, while my unruly blonde curls stopped at my shoulders. People were often surprised that we were sisters, but when we interacted, you could tell we were related. No one had ever seen sisters who were so close. We were friends. Most siblings I knew fought constantly, but my sister and I didn't. We were lucky to have a great relationship. I guess all the privilege I grew up with hit me when I arrived at university. I made friends with many people from different backgrounds and realized how blind I was to the world. I had just coasted along while others had worked themselves almost to death just to get a chance. Seeing how easy I had it in comparison made me feel like a spoiled brat. I took the waitressing job to learn to function independently. I even called my parents and told them not to send me money anymore. I was determined to be independent. My friend Key worked there, and it was nice to work with a friend. We could complain together about hard shifts and mean customers. Kai and I mostly worked the night shift. We started at 5 p.m. and the restaurant closed around 11 p.m., depending on how many customers stayed past the official closing time of 10:30 p.m. We stayed to mop the floor and clean the seating area. We took a lot of abuse during the night shift. People tend to drink more during the dinner rush and take out their frustration on the waitress. To be clear, not all customers are assholes, but the assholes stand out. However, it was worth it for the generous tips from drunk guests. Kay had it worse than me because of her Tanzanian heritage. She had a regular who made the same terrible slave joke every time she brought him his food. The manager never did anything, and the owners were never there. The guy gave a huge tip, but was a racist idiot who made her cringe with embarrassment every time she saw him in her section. We had gotten used to it. After a guy asked me in front of his kids if my private area was on the menu, I thought it was impossible to ever feel truly uncomfortable with a customer again. I was jaded. About 4 to 5 weeks ago, however, that changed. A man was seated in my section. He was eating alone, and I always try to make solo diners feel special. They are often nice and never really seem to cause trouble. I went to his table to take his drink order. I could feel him staring at me from across the small restaurant as I approached his table. He was middle-aged, probably the same age as my parents. He looked unkempt with somewhat messy hair and wore glasses that sat a little crooked, as well as stains on his worn jacket. He didn't break his gaze once. His eyes were on me the whole time. The closer I got, the more uncomfortable it became for me. He didn't look happy, but at the same time, he did. He just stared at me with this strange expression, as if I were some kind of deity in flesh and blood. I asked him what he would like, remaining friendly and professional, but decided not to interact too much. Something about this man gave me the feeling that he was strange. He ordered a bottle of dry white wine, and I knew I would be spending a longer time here. I brought him the bottle and poured the first glass, while he continued to stare at me with the same strange expression. Under normal circumstances in the real world, I would have asked what his problem was, but this was work. He was relatively quiet, and I needed a good tip to afford a festival ticket. I took his appetizer order and walked away to tend to my other tables. Every customer I interacted with merged into a single person. The only thing I really noticed all night was that this guy was staring at me the entire time. The whole time I brought him food, he ate. I waited on other tables and walked through the restaurant to do my job. I found myself constantly in the kitchen to escape his gaze. The cooks laughed at me and said that I had just hooked a new boyfriend. The more spooked I got, the funnier they found it. But something about it sent a shiver down my spine. I didn't find it funny at all. He stayed for an hour and a half, ate 3 courses, and drank 2 bottles of wine. He left a decent tip. Even as he left, he was still staring at me. He had to almost walk backward to avoid breaking eye contact. After closing, I could only think about the man. It had been busy all night, and I had only seen Key at the end. She hadn't noticed him. Damn, I had hoped someone else had seen it so I wouldn't feel so stupid. The following week, I didn't think much about it. With uni work, other customers, and various events, the man who stared at me just became another weird customer I had. A story to tell over the cigarette smoked after closing. That changed exactly 1 week later when the man was sitting in my section again. This time he wasn't alone. He had brought a woman with him. Just like him, she had disheveled curls, huge dark circles under her eyes, and an exhausted expression. I noticed them before they noticed me and was glad he wasn't alone this time. At first, I thought the woman's presence would distract him and stop the staring. I was wrong. As I walked to their table after a deep breath, my heart sank. The woman noticed me and looked at me shocked and horrified. She wore the same strange expression the man had the first time and had again now. They stared at me in perfect unison. I took their drink orders and hurried away, hearing unintelligible whispering as I left. Something was wrong. Casey was working this time too, and had the section right next to mine. I met her in the kitchen and told her he was back, and the woman was doing the same thing. As expected, the behavior continued when I took their food orders. After I brought the drinks, the woman tried to speak to me. "Chloe?" She began quietly, but the man grabbed her knee without breaking eye contact with me. I wondered how she knew my name. But of course, during my standard waitress greeting, I always say my name. Not many customers remember it, and the restaurant was quite upscale, so we don't wear name tags. They had really been paying attention. That made me nervous. The man interrupted her by giving her order along with his. I never liked it when someone ordered for their partner. It seems a bit old-fashioned. I didn't stay long, but the whispering seemed more targeted this time. They stayed for 2 hours this time. The man stared at me again just like the week before, and the woman alternated between the same look and rushing to the ladies' room to powder her nose. Each time she came back even more nervous, which probably explained the dark circles. Again, they left a generous tip, but it didn't help alleviate the feeling of deep unease. At the end of the evening, Kai told me that she had noticed it too. She said it was creepy how they looked at me. It may sound like an overreaction, but neither of them took their eyes off me, unless I moved out of their line of sight. It was good to know someone else had seen it too. They came back the next week, and the week after, and the week after that. I tried to swap shifts, but it didn't fit my uni schedule, and I tried to change sections. On one of the nights, Kay served their table for me, and even when she took their drink order, they stared at me. It was as if no one else in the room existed for them. I had complained to the manager, but he just laughed it off. He couldn't just talk to customers about what he described as merely staring at one of his employees. After a few weeks, the man started coming alone more often at different times during the week. He came to drink and eat something small. If I wasn't on duty, he didn't stay long. The manager even joked that my boyfriend had been there and walked back home because I wasn't there. The cooks found it hilarious. No one knew how much it scared me. They showed up everywhere, shopped in the same stores as me, walked past me on the street, took the same buses as me but to different stops. I always only saw them for a brief moment, or it was too crowded to approach them and ask why they were following me. One evening recently, I could have sworn I saw the woman. She was staring from across the street into my window on campus. When I grabbed my phone to call the police and looked up, she was gone. I cried that evening, torn between genuine fear and the worry that I was reading too much into nothing. After the incident where I saw the woman from the window, I started carrying a rape emergency alarm with me. I just wanted to have something loud in case I was ever attacked. This couple seemed so fixated on me that I felt vulnerable all the time. I didn't know if I should call the police or not. I had no real proof, and they hadn't done anything illegal. Can someone be arrested for making you uncomfortable? Every week I dreaded that shift, the one I knew they would be at. My emergency alarm didn't really give me more security. The tip wasn't worth it anymore. I was starting to lose my mind over this whole thing. This weekend it was worse than ever. I had seen them a total of 12 times throughout the week, and who knows how many times they watched me without me knowing. That same sad but happy expression they make every time. I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was the lack of sleep. Maybe the sleeping pills I had taken for it. Probably, though, it was the fact that Key was away this weekend, and I didn't have a ride home that evening. Whatever it was, something convinced me to pack a knife in my bag that evening. Despite everything, I am still glad I did. As expected, the couple came for their weekly booking. I didn't serve them. The best I got from the manager was that he served them himself, so I didn't have to. They stared at me the whole time, as always. The woman kept pulling something out of her bag and looking at it under the table. The man would occasionally break his gaze to see what she had in her hand and then stare at me again. It seemed to surprise him every time. Their food came and went, and they left the restaurant. The woman was rummaging in her bag again as they left the building. They walked right past me, and I only heard 4 words from the man to the woman as they left. Not yet, but tonight. A shiver ran down my spine. There was no one here to take me home. Everyone else who was there for closing stayed much longer than me to clean up the kitchen and cash out, and I knew that when I left, I would be alone. I knew they wanted to do something to me. I was so glad I had the knife with me. Even if this whole situation was making me paranoid, at least I had some protection. I finished my shift, and it was time to go. I could feel the trembling of my hands and the sweat on my palms as I headed to the bus stop. Every shadow made me flinch. It was quiet outside, the shops were all closed, and there were few people around. Occasionally a car drove by. I could hear footsteps behind me and knew they were following me. I kept one hand in my pocket, ready to pull the knife if I needed it. As I sat at the bus stop, I finally began to see the outlines of 2 figures approaching me. I wasn't going to give them time to do anything to me. I ran as fast as I could. They kept up well, despite their age and exhausted faces. I thought they would catch me until suddenly I ran across the street. The last thing I heard was the woman screaming the name Harley. Then there was a loud bang, and all sound around me went numb. This might not make much sense, but I don't know how else to explain it. Everything had this dull, muffled feeling. It was as if the world was running in slow motion. I turned around and saw the mangled bodies of my stalkers lying in front of the bus, which had come to an abrupt halt after hitting them. Bones protruded from bloody tears in their flesh. The expression in their eyes, however, had not disappeared, and somehow it still looked like they were staring at me. I ran to the pile of wreckage, ran to the couple to check for a pulse while the horrified bus driver got out of his vehicle. As I examined the woman, I heard a crinkling in her pocket and quickly reached for the contents. 2 folded, crumpled pieces of paper, and without looking at them, I shoved them into my pocket while continuing to attempt CPR unsuccessfully. The couple was dead. I gave my statement to the police, told the paramedics what happened, and tried to explain to the bus driver that I was being chased, and it wasn't his fault. They had literally run into the street in front of him. It seemed to take hours before they finally let me go home. When I fell into my bed, I remembered the pieces of paper I had put in my pocket and took them out. I unfolded and smoothed them out and froze at the content. The first was an article from 20 years ago in a national newspaper. The headline read, "We named her Harley, the story of the couple whose baby was stolen from the womb." The photo showed the couple holding baby clothes and looking devastated. The article explained that the woman had spent a lot of time in the hospital recovering from the C-section performed in the 8th week of pregnancy. She was only alive due to the apparent surgical knowledge of the unknown attackers who had broken into her house and performed it while her husband was on a business trip. The second piece of paper confirmed my worst fears. It was a printed photo of the woman's mother with untamed blonde curls down to her shoulders and a face that was my mirror image. This morning, the newspapers reported on the identities of the victims and mentioned their past tragedies. My parents call constantly to see how I am after the incident. I thought I was afraid of the couple, but that was nothing compared to the fear I feel every time the phone rings. Next true horror story. I always enjoyed walking home after a late shift at the coffee shop. The quiet streets and the cool night air help me unwind after a long day. There is something peaceful about the city at night, the buildings bathing in the light of the street lamps, while I hear the distant hum of traffic and feel the occasional rustle of leaves in the pleasant breeze. I often walk at a leisurely pace, enjoying these moments of solitude. My path takes me through a small park, past a row of quaint shops, and then down a quiet residential street lined with charming old houses. It is a familiar path that I have walked countless times without giving it another thought. These late night walks were always a time for me to switch off, to leave the stress of the day behind me before finally falling into bed. Lately, however, the feeling of calm I once found in it has turned into a source of anxiety. It started with small things. I felt the weight of invisible eyes tracking my every move as I walked my usual route. But when I turned around, the street was empty. At first, I thought it was paranoia or exhaustion. Everyone has that weird feeling sometimes, right? One evening, I noticed a car parked not far from my apartment. It wasn't unusual for cars to park there, but something about this one didn't seem right to me. It was always the same car, and it always appeared exactly when I was going to work, and when I came back it was still there. I tried to explain it away simply. Maybe it just belonged to someone in the building. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. The turning point came last Thursday. I closed the coffee shop last, as always. As I locked the door, I saw a shadow under a streetlight across the street. The figure didn't move, just stood there staring in my direction. My heart raced, but I forced myself to walk calmly to my car and pretend I hadn't noticed anything. When I looked in the rearview mirror, the figure was gone. The next morning, I found a note under the windshield wiper. "You look beautiful when you are afraid." My blood ran cold. It wasn't just my imagination. Someone was really watching me. I reported it to the police, but they brushed it off as a simple prank. "Probably just a jokester trying to scare you," they said. But I knew it was more than that. Over the next few days, the feeling of being watched intensified. I started seeing the same person again and again from a distance. Whether I was at the supermarket, going to the post office, or even looking out of my apartment window, the figure was there, lurking at the edge of my field of vision. It was as if they knew my every move, every gesture, every thought. I began to isolate myself, avoiding friends and family out of fear. My sleep became restless as I was plagued by nightmares of being chased, and I became increasingly paranoid. I felt a constant pressure on my chest, a terrifying sense of impending doom that I couldn't escape. One night, as is routine, I came home and found my apartment door slightly open. Of course, that is very strange. After all, I always closed it and then locked it, didn't I? My heart pounded as I opened it, terrified of what I might find inside. The apartment looked untouched, but there was evidence of an intruder. A single red rose lay on my kitchen table, along with another message. "I know where you sleep." Panic seized me. I called the police again, but according to them, there were no signs of a break-in and nothing had been stolen. It was probably just a coincidence, they said. Lock the door and be vigilant. Coincidence? Coincidence? Are they serious? I started seeing a therapist in hopes of alleviating my growing paranoia, but even there, in the supposedly safe environment of a professional practice, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The therapist tried to reassure me, saying it was all just in my head, a manifestation of stress and anxiety, but I knew that wasn't true. The turning point came when I found a dead cat in front of my apartment door, a terrifying reminder that my stalker didn't just mean it playfully. It was a message. I packed my bag and fled to a hotel, hoping to find a little safety there. But even there, I was haunted by the feeling that I was being watched. I couldn't escape. I can't hide. My life had become a prison of fear and paranoia. Every creak of the floor, every shadow, every stranger's glance felt like a threat. They are relentless, a shadow following me everywhere, stealing my life and my sanity. I have started developing a series of habits, really rituals, that I use to keep the fear at bay. Every night I check the locks on all doors and windows, sometimes 3 or 4 times, before finally convincing myself it is safe to go to bed. Even then, I often lie awake for hours, listening to all the unusual noises. My heart races at every creak or groan of the old building. During the day, I avoid going outside as much as possible. I have started ordering groceries online, and I even persuaded my boss to give me a few days off. If I do venture outside, I move quickly and constantly scan the surroundings for signs of my pursuer. I wear sunglasses and a hat to disguise myself and make it harder for him to recognize me. But no matter what I do, I can't shake the feeling that he is still out there, just barely out of my sight. The messages keep coming. I find them under the windshield wiper in the door, in the mail slot, even in the groceries when I have them delivered. Each one is more disturbing than the last. You can't hide from me. I see you. You belong to me. The handwriting is always the same, neat and precise, almost elegant. It is a stark contrast to the disturbing messages they contain. I have even changed my phone number twice, but the unknown calls continue. At first, it was just heavy breathing, occasionally the whispering of my name. Now they are more explicit, describing in detail the things my stalker wants to do to me. I have stopped answering the phone altogether and let every call go to voicemail. But even then, there are messages waiting for me, constantly reminding me that I am never really alone. My friends and family are worried about me. They see how it is changing me, the dark circles under my eyes, how I flinch at the slightest sound. I have tried to explain to them what is going on, but most don't understand. It's all just in your head. You're just stressed. I have started keeping a journal recording every encounter, every message, every call, the date and the exact time down to the second. It is a way to ground myself, to remind myself that it is real, that I am not just making it up. Sometimes I read the entries back, hoping to find a clue or a pattern that I missed, but it is always the same, a relentless, inescapable nightmare. One night I was woken by someone tapping on my bedroom window. My apartment is on the 3rd floor, and there is no fire escape or any other way to get up there. The logical part of my brain told me it was just the wind, or maybe a branch of a tree outside. But deep down, I knew it was him. I remained completely still, hardly daring to breathe until the tapping finally stopped, and I could hear the pounding of my heart in my ears. I had installed security cameras around my apartment, but they gave me little comfort. I spend hours going through the footage, looking for a hint of him. Sometimes I think I see something, a shadow moving in the background, a figure standing just outside the frame. But it is always too blurry, too out of focus to be sure. I have even tried staying with friends, hoping the company of other people would make me safer. But the feeling of being watched never goes away. One night, when I was at my best friend's place, I found a note slipped under the door. You can't escape me. As the days turn into weeks, I realize I am sinking deeper and deeper into despair. I am constantly on guard. My nerves are stretched to the breaking point. I have started having panic attacks. My chest tightens, and my breath comes in short intervals. The fear is always there, a dark cloud hovering over me and suffocating me. Last night I had a dream, or maybe it was a nightmare. I was walking home from the coffee shop as usual, but it was different. The streets were empty, the buildings dark, and an unbearable silence hung in the air. The shadows seemed to reach out, twisting to touch me. I could feel eyes on me, hundreds of them staring at me and waiting. I tried to run, but my feet felt like they were stuck in molasses. Slow and heavy. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't run. I woke up bathed in sweat, my heart racing. It took a moment until I realized where I was before convincing myself it was just a dream. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. I am physically and mentally exhausted. The constant fear, the sleepless nights, the endless feeling of being watched. It is all too much. I feel like I am losing my mind, on the verge of a nervous breakdown. I thought about moving somewhere far away and starting over, but deep down I know it wouldn't make a difference. My stalker would find me no matter where I go. He is always there, always watching me, always waiting. Sometimes I wonder who he is, why he is doing this to me. Is it someone I know, a stranger? What did I do to deserve this? But I know it wouldn't change anything even if I knew the answers. The fear would still be there. This constant feeling of threat, the feeling that I am never truly safe. Next true horror story. I used to love going hiking and camping alone. I had a few strange moments as a solo female traveler, but most of my experiences were overall positive. I grew up in the deep south, so sometimes I have this overwhelming need to get out of the city and spend time alone. On this particular occasion, I drove for 2 days and went to a very remote place. I had set my mind on doing an obscure 15-mile hike in the middle of nowhere. The trailhead was a bit off the beaten path and hard to reach by car, so I decided to park, hike 4 miles, and camp to set off early the next morning and finish the route. When I stopped in the nearest town, a man asked me about my plans. I didn't think much of it, but revealed my general itinerary to him. He became a bit tense and asked if it was a good idea to be alone in such an isolated place. I laughed because I had done much more adventurous undertakings, and assured him I was fine. To this day, something about that interaction seems strange to me. However, he was very old, so he couldn't have followed me. The hike to the general area, where the trailhead began, was simply beautiful. I felt the rush that comes with isolation and stopped paying much attention to the surroundings. It didn't occur to me to check the location. I set up my camp quite early, which gave me time to explore. I was overjoyed as I waded through a small creek like a child. I heard a tree branch break but didn't think much of it until I noticed a small hint of movement out of the corner of my eye. I paused, expecting to see an animal, but as I scanned the tree line, everything was still. Then I saw a small piece of fabric blowing in the wind, and just barely recognized the shape of a... I froze and stared intently, letting my eyes adjust to the figure in the distance. I had almost convinced myself that I had gone crazy. I took a step forward, ready to find a reasonable explanation, when suddenly a man ran north. He ran a few steps and then disappeared into the woods. I felt sick. I had just been thinking about changing clothes because I was convinced I was completely alone. At this point, I had to make a decision. It was getting dark. By the time I broke down camp, it would probably be dangerous to hike back to the car. The trail wasn't bad, and I am an experienced hiker, but I wasn't familiar with the terrain. On the other hand, someone had been watching me, and I hadn't told anyone at home where I was. Usually, I trust that people aren't dangerous, and thought he was a curious local with no bad intentions. It had definitely been a man, I know that for sure, and that will be important later in the story. He was at least 6 feet tall, and I could tell by the way he ran. After some consideration, I decided to stay. I was exhausted and told myself that the fear was only in my head. However, I took out my pepper spray. I stayed awake for a while reading with a lantern, but eventually I turned off the light and got comfortable. As I was almost asleep, however, something woke me up. I don't know exactly what it was, but I had this overwhelming feeling that I was not alone. Something also told me that I shouldn't turn on my lantern. My logic was that it would be better not to drive them away in case I was being stalked. Very, very slowly, I put on my shoes and crawled out of my tent. I began to study the surroundings with slow and careful precision, but it was too dark to recognize anything. I felt something, though. I couldn't explain it, but I knew I wasn't alone. "You need to go," whispered a voice behind me. I turned around quickly and felt a scream stuck in my throat. A woman was crouching at the edge of the clearing watching me. I knew it was a woman because she was wearing a nightgown, which meant that the man I had seen earlier was somewhere invisible, possibly watching this interaction. "You need to go," she said louder. This time I screamed, I screamed and stumbled back. Somehow I had enough sense to grab my small backpack before running towards my car, which was miles away. I had a hat with a small lamp, but otherwise, I stumbled in the dark, praying that I was on the right path. I was also convinced that I would be grabbed at any moment. Thank God I had my keys in my pocket. Somehow I made it to my car. I am pretty sure it was my PR, and I have never been so happy to get into my rickety little car. I locked the doors and breathed a sigh of relief when my car started. I had almost expected it to be dead. I drove for an hour until my cell reception was good enough to find a hostel nearby. It was the first time in my life that I was grateful to be in a shared dorm, because I didn't want to be alone. It was late when I arrived, so I spoke to no one until the next morning, when I finally made friends with a few other hikers and told my story. They listened in horror while I wept with fear. Everyone was absolutely stunned except for the owner of the hoteled hostel complex, who simply shrugged his shoulders. There is only one family in that area. I think I know who that woman was, and I promise she is completely harmless, the owner remarked. Why then? I asked. Why did she sneak into my camp? She must have stalked me. I didn't have a fire or anything. He pondered. I don't know, but I suspect she had a reason. Armed with a new group of hiking friends, we went back to my campsite later that morning. I had left thousands of dollars in food and equipment behind. The next part is the creepiest. My tent was still set up, but all my things had been rifled through. However, it hadn't been looted. In fact, everything looked neat and perfectly laid out, as if someone had known I would come back. Nothing was missing. I packed everything up while my new hiking friends, and I suggested various theories to explain what had happened. Before I left, I glanced at the tree line to see if I was still being watched. I saw nothing, but just in case someone was watching, I nodded thanks with my hat. I have gone through this countless times in my head and considered every possibility. Most likely, I think someone was trying to catch a glimpse of me while I was changing or something. I don't want to think about the worst case scenario. Still, I can't shake the feeling that the woman I saw wasn't here to harm me or scare me. I have the overwhelming feeling that she knew something I didn't know, and that she knew I had to leave. Next true horror story. A bit of background: I was 20 at the time, moved to my uncle's in San Antonio, Texas, with the agreement that I didn't have to pay rent as long as I helped him with chores and my cousins. I got a job at a very well-known coffee chain downtown near the tourist part of the area. We had many regulars and also many homeless people coming in and out. However, I felt relatively safe because I knew the people there, and there was almost always a lot of foot traffic. I even took walks in the area after work, especially because I was very close to the river walk. A few months into the job, I was friends with everyone I worked with. We were all very close. On this particular day, it was the last day of work for one of my colleagues. There were about 3 guys who had been there almost all morning. They hadn't bought anything and were just hanging around, which wasn't unusual for my location. On my break, I decided to go to a nearby drugstore to get a farewell card and maybe a small gift for said colleague. I walked out, put my headphones in, and before I could press play, I heard the door open behind me and footsteps following me. Whoever it was caught up quickly and started matching my pace exactly. I turned around, and it was one of the guys who had been there all day. He was a bit taller than me and reminded me a lot of Lakeith Stanfield. He tried to ask for my number, and I told him kindly that I said no. He insisted, and I told him with a brief outburst of anger to get lost. He stopped and stared at me in surprise, as I don't look like someone who would speak up or be rude. He stood there as I walked away, and when I came back, they were gone. I told my colleagues about the encounter, and we laughed about it. I thought that would be the end of the story. I was wrong. Every shift after that, he was already there, just hanging around, or he came in the middle of my shift, sometimes with someone else, sometimes alone. I thought he was just another homeless face because he was always there. My shifts were sporadic. Some days I opened, some days I closed, some days I worked midday. But it didn't matter. He was always there. At this point, I started getting paranoid. I constantly caught him staring in my direction. He never ordered anything, never spoke to me, and luckily he didn't follow me either. He just sat there and watched me. I started telling my colleagues, and they started noticing it too. One of my team leaders helped me by sending me to the back to wash dishes or organize the fridge. My colleagues also tried to position themselves to shield me from his view. I started feeling uncomfortable at work. Sometimes when I closed the shift, a colleague walked me to my car before going home, or if I wasn't closing, they walked me to my car and then turned around and went back to work. One day, when he was just staring at me again, I was working at the register. He came up to me and ordered a water. I asked for his name for the order. Now I had his first name just in case. He took his water and sat down. I had already told my manager about him. But since he hadn't really done anything, we couldn't do anything else but note it in the manager's book. The next day I was working with my manager. It was him, 2 other colleagues, and me. I told them I had to go to the bathroom quickly. There were 2 restrooms right next to each other, but they weren't really visible from the cafe area and the register, and they weren't gender specific. I walked around the bar area into the lobby area, had to walk past his table and down the hall to get to the restrooms. I noticed he stood up before I went into the restroom. I sat down to do my business when someone rattled the door. I called out that it was occupied, but whoever it was kept rattling the door until I was finished. When I opened the door, no one was there, and on the way back, I noticed him sitting back down in his chair. I was totally spooked and told my boss about it. He couldn't say anything to him because we had no proof it was him. Later in the shift, he stood up and got a coffee from the pickup area. My boss assumed he had ordered it and let him take it, but I told him that wasn't the case, and that it wasn't even his name. My boss used this as an opportunity to tell him that he wasn't allowed to come back if he did something like that again. The man apologized and actually followed the rules every day after that. He went back to what he always did, just staring at me. Valentine's Day. One of my team leaders and I were scheduled on certain Thursdays after closing to deep clean the store. We stayed until 1 a.m. This Thursday was like that too. We were almost done, and I had to clean the restrooms as one of the last tasks. I was finished, and as I came out of the restroom, I saw him pressing both hands against the window, eyes wide, staring at me with an incredibly intense look. I froze for a moment and stared back. I noticed that on one of his palms pressed against the window, a purple foam heart was stuck. He didn't move at all. I panicked and slipped back into the restroom. I called Hannah. Hannah, he's here. He's back. She could barely hear me over the loud music we had turned up. Hannah was the team leader helping me hide from him, so she knew about my huge fear of him. She went towards the restroom and called out, "What are you saying? What's wrong?" As soon as she got closer, she saw him. I told her again, "He's here. He's watching me." She started screaming through the window, "You need to leave. If you don't go, we're calling the police." I stepped out a bit to see if he was leaving, but he ignored her, and his eyes were fixed on me. I stepped back into the restroom, and my team leader continued screaming for him to leave and threatened him with the police. About 5 minutes passed, and he noticed that I wasn't coming out until he left, so he did. The next day I told my manager and said I wanted to file a police report. He told me I should wait until he talks to his boss. He showed up again that day, but I was only there to talk to my manager, and then left immediately. When I got home, a friend persuaded me to call the police. So I texted my boss that I don't care what he or his boss says. I am scared and I will file this report. I dialed 311 SIR non-emergency, and I told them a summary of the situation. They told me they would send someone to my residence to take the official report. The 2 officers were so nice and supportive. I told them the whole story and how my boss saw no need to involve the police since nothing happened to me. The officers told me I should have called immediately and defended me, saying they could have arrested him for harassment. I thanked them, and they told me to call 911 immediately if he shows up so they can arrest him for trespassing and harassment. I think that day my boss banned him and warned him because he never showed up at the coffee shop again. A few months later, when I felt comfortable downtown again, I was walking with a few friends. We were near my workplace, and as we turned a corner, I saw him. So I ducked into a small shop, and my friends followed me. I told them I had seen him, and they kept an eye out for him. When he was out of sight, we left the store, and that was the last time I saw him. So creepy coffee shop stalker, let's please never meet again. Next true horror story. The summer after my high school graduation, I was still living at home. I was up late one night packing for a camping trip with my friends. It was incredibly hot, so I had the window open while I sat and folded clothes. It was about 2 a.m., and the next thing I knew, a hand came through the slit in the fly screen window. I screamed, and the hand immediately withdrew. I was completely surprised, but part of me wondered if it was maybe my younger brother playing a prank on me. I got up, looked out the window, and saw only the silhouette of a man staring at me. I ran into my brother's room, and he was there playing video games. We called the police, who came and searched the area. They found nothing, warned us and our parents to lock the windows and doors, and left. We were still shaken, and my mother had a feeling he would come back. It turned out her maternal intuition was right. She went outside and waited on our back porch. After about 20 minutes or so, she saw a man in black clothing sneaking into our yard along the tree line. Unfortunately, there was no fence on that side. He hid behind a tree for a few seconds, then ran to another tree and hid there while slowly moving towards my window. My mother shouted something at him, and he ran away. The police came again and found no trace of him again. I never opened that window again, not even the curtains. My parents installed motion sensor lights, and that seemed to be the end of the matter. About 6 months later, my friend and I moved into an apartment downtown together. We were really excited as this was our first home of our own. The apartment wasn't exactly top quality, but it was so nice to live in the city. The downside was that there was only street parking. After a few weeks, my car was broken into. Nothing was stolen, but a single rose lay on the passenger seat. It was creepy, but I swore to stay vigilant and safe. I always tried to park near the entrance, near the lights, but often it was difficult to get these spots, and I often had to park further away on darker streets. Things began to escalate quickly. My car was broken into at least once a week. Mostly there was a flower in it, which I always threw on the floor, but once a pair of men's underwear was in it, and even creepier was when once a Tootsie Roll, my favorite candy, lay in it. That made me wonder if the person knew me personally, and I started becoming suspicious of everyone. In the basement of the building, there was a laundry room, and one day I went down to pick up a load of laundry that had finished drying. As I started folding, I realized that all my underwear, bras, and panties were gone. A week later, I had a friend visiting from school, and during his visit, his tires were slashed. When the first letter arrived, I had already started making plans to move somewhere else. The letter described a love for me that had existed for years. It mentioned things that proved he had watched me closely. I was able to arrange for another friend to take over my lease, and moved with another friend to the other side of the city. It was a gated complex with an underground garage accessible only to tenants. I felt much safer, and the extra money spent was definitely worth the peace of mind. It was quiet for a few months, and then my roommate got a boyfriend. Most of us were suspicious of Ashley's new boyfriend from the start. For one, they had met on MySpace after he contacted her. Another reason was that the new boyfriend was good-looking, and although Ashley was a wonderful person, she just wasn't the type someone like him would normally date. Ashley was thrilled. She had never had a boyfriend and really felt like he was her Prince Charming. I found him strange and creepy from the start. Matt was rather reserved and always seemed to wear an uneasy, squinting smile. It was hard to have a conversation with him, because he always introduced something disjointed into the conversation that had nothing to do with what we were just talking about. I had deleted my MySpace account when the first stalking incidents began, but I created a fake account to find out more about Matt. It didn't seem like he really knew any friends in real life. There were only pictures of himself, and the rest of the information was vague. My friends and I tried gently to discourage her from continuing to see Matt. Technically, he had done nothing wrong. But he was just so strange. She immediately became defensive and ended the conversation. Matt spent more time in the apartment, and I always found some excuses not to come home. One day I came home from work and found Matt alone on my couch drinking a beer. Ashley had been called into work and told him he could just hang out. I was angry because I didn't want to spend time with him, so I grabbed a beer and a snack and went to my room, where I slammed the door. About half an hour later, he knocked on my door and suggested we watch TV and get to know each other better, because we both loved Ashley. I didn't want to, but decided to maybe just give it a try. He put on a film, and I tried to just focus on the film because I didn't want to talk. At some point, I glanced at Matt, and he was staring at me with a smile on his face. I snapped a "what?" at him, and he continued smiling and said, "I just can't believe it." "About what?" I asked. He said nothing and continued watching the film, still smiling. I had no clue what he meant, but the whole interaction made every hair on my body stand up. I excused myself and locked myself in my room. Another month passed, and I had managed to almost never be at home except to sleep and shower. Matt practically lived there and had even moved a lot of his stuff into Ashley's room. I really didn't want to move again, but started looking for other options. On their 6-month anniversary, I saw a huge bouquet of flowers on the table and an already opened card set up next to it. I rolled my eyes and was about to leave when I decided to see what the freak had written her. When I opened the card, my heart started beating through my chest. Without reading a single word, I shook. The handwriting was exactly the same as the one my stalker had sent me. I had kept it as evidence and took it out of my desk to compare. The handwriting was unique and identical. Matt was the stalker. I called the police first. While they were on their way, I called Ashley and asked her to come over. She was at work but said she would come as soon as possible. I was afraid to tell her because I knew she would be devastated. The police took a statement from me and actually went to Ashley's work to get more information from her, and they broke the news to her. Obviously, Ashley called Matt and left an angry message, although the police had told her not to say anything, and he disappeared completely after that. There was no Matt or anyone who looked like him at the place where he said he worked. Ashley had never been to his apartment because he said he was staying with friends while trying to save money for a trip to Europe. His family lived abroad, and she had never met any of his friends because he said they had fallen out because he wanted to spend so much time with Ashley. It was all lies, and in the end, she dated a stranger. We don't even know if Matt was his real name. The icing on the cake of the whole thing was when we went through Matt's stuff. He had left everything behind when he disappeared, and Ashley and I decided to go through it all. There was a duffel bag full of gym clothes, but in one of the compartments were about 10 pictures of me. All were taken from a distance, except for one where I was sleeping. The bedding was current, so I knew it must have been in the current apartment before I started locking my bedroom door. Some pictures were from the time before the incident at my parents', which led us to think he was the one there too. 2 pairs of my missing underwear were there, and I shudder to think what he did with the rest. A Starbucks lid with my red lipstick prints, a necklace I hadn't even missed, some other random sick souvenirs. The police never found him. I decided to accept an offer abroad that I had been considering and disappeared. Unfortunately, Ashley and I drifted apart quickly. She had great difficulty accepting that her first love was a complete psycho. I think I had subconscious anger, perhaps misguided, about having believed all his lies and letting him into our lives. I don't know what his end goal was. Would he have tried to hurt me, or was he simply content to be in my world? I will never know. Being stalked changes you. When I lived on the other side of the world, I always looked over my shoulder wherever I went. I still have no social media accounts linked to my real name. I am married and have children, and know that he stopped tormenting me and terrorized another poor woman. But every time I visit my hometown, I am tense and keep a low profile. Part of me will always be worried that Matt will show up again.